What happens to money when someone close to you dies? And how do you cope with the big decisions that are coming your way whilst grieving?
Even the basic of tasks can be so overwhelming because you're carrying such emotional burden and pain.
When somebody's ill for a long time and you know that they're going to pass away, it can still be quite difficult to actually conceive of that, prepare for it, and then be emotionally ready for when that happens.
When these things happen, there's also a big thing that comes into play, which is financial vulnerability. It's very hard in those situations emotionally to stop, reflect, think about the how and the what.
What do you see as the immediate practical issues that people have got to deal with inside that emotional maelstrom?
If you think about it as a pyramid, there's the base fundamentals of the bills, etc. But then as you get up, what are the finances that were in situ? What savings are there? What pension, as you say? Don't underestimate how difficult that will be.
How do you quantify and qualify the value of both insurance and advice for people?
So if you've got a mortgage today and you don't have cover, most certainly you should be reaching out to who gave you that mortgage and having that conversation.
We can get a money system in place so that we can remove the pressure, slow decisions down, and give ourselves time and permission to focus on dealing with loss rather than just paperwork. What we've touched on is getting advice and support and help before we encounter grief is ideal, not always possible. Welcome back to the Funkle Pod, where we cover the money topics you didn't learn about in school with expert guests, and it's always jargon-free. Now, today we're going to talk about something that almost everyone will face, but nobody's really properly prepared for. What happens to money when someone close to you dies? And how do you cope with the big decisions that are coming your way whilst grieving? Our guest today is Louise Colley from Zurich. Zurich's a great big insurance company, and Louise is a leading voice on how the financial services profession, including insurers and financial advisors, can and should better support people through bereavement, grief, and financial shock. Louise has been involved in Zurich's bereavement support initiative, helping families navigate things like the policies and the paperwork, but also the human reality of it. So this episode is about practical money tasks that people are going to face suddenly, why those tasks are so much harder in grief, what can be done to reduce the stress when people need time and space the most. Louise, welcome to the Funkle Pod. So, Louise, you and Zurich, you've been researching into this. Grief, money, the mind. What happens emotionally when somebody close to you dies, and why does it mean that even simple admin tasks suddenly feel impossible?
Yeah, no, it's a great question to start there. I mean, after death, let's to be frank, it's not just about grief. It's a multitude of things. It's grief, but it's then about how do you then rebuild essentially what's going on around you. And sadly, at a point of death, the administration that's required is significant, and we don't ever want to think about this, right? We put it away. So you're already in an emotional shock situation, and I'm sure all of us deal with this very differently. But then it's the shocks there, but even the basic of tasks can be so overwhelming because you're carrying such emotional burden and pain. And as we all know, when we're in an emotional shock and state, we all know that the way we deal with practical tasks becomes very difficult. You're having another amount of pressure on you. So I think we absolutely come to a point of, everything overconsumes, and how do you just step away and have that time to grieve, but at the same time, how do you manage all of this? So it's a very difficult situation to be within.
Yeah. And I know from experience that it's not just about when somebody dies suddenly or unexpectedly. It's actually even the case when somebody's ill for a long time and you know that they're going to pass away. it can still be quite difficult to actually conceive of that, prepare for it, and then be emotionally ready for when that happens. I know from my experience with my father passing away that we knew that that was coming for quite some time. Still, that moment hits you, and then there's whether it's suddenly or it's expected, there's a vulnerability that people face at that moment, isn't there?
Yeah, there absolutely is. I mean, after loss, you get into this situation of that, that it could be, it's a multitude of emotions. It's a real spectrum of emotions. And that could be whether it's a father, whether it's a husband, a wife, whether it's a partner, whatever it is, a child, whatever it is, the sort of the intensity and range of emotion, is really difficult, and you can plan and you can plan and you can plan, but none of us know when that happens how we will react, right? We all think that we know how we will, but the key thing is in that is how do you in those situations know that, because ultimately when these things happen there's also a big thing that comes into play, which is financial vulnerability. What does that consequence mean now to all things finances, right? That is something that isn't a fixed state that you think, well, I know what to do, I know what this now means and I know what to plan around. So I think for me, that whole how we respond, I think there's this real importance around be kind to yourself. Understand that you don't know how this is going to play through, but when it does play through, you need to be, you need to think about what's that support framework around you that can be really there to help you. And that's why, I mean, I'm sure we'll get onto it later, understanding that roller coaster of emotion and making sure that there is support there so you do navigate it through and you get to the other side.
Let's try and define that concept of, because the average man and woman out in the street might not have heard it or be aware of it. This concept of financial vulnerability, which is that at times of heightened emotion, like when someone's passed away, people can be susceptible to making the wrong decision, to making emotionally driven decisions when it comes to money. And whether that decision is actually doing something, or maybe it's not doing something, this is something that people need to be acutely aware of, isn't it? How do you guys see that playing out in the insurance world?
Yeah, I mean, you imagine, right? Things happen, and when you're in that emotional state, the decision you make may ultimately may not be the right one. I mean, I'll give you a great example where someone could have life insurance as an example, which was there with a purpose to pay the mortgage, etc. It's really important at that point not just to go transactional and think that's the answer. It's important to speak and determine what's the best use of those funds given the position, the financial position that you find yourself in, right? The death of a partner is a great example, particularly if it's a family or even if there's no family. What does that then mean to the decisions thereafter as to how you're going to run the house, how you're going to pay bills, etc. So understanding that position to move forward so that you're not fearful, you don't feel financially vulnerable, you have an ability to understand what that means and remove that vulnerability so you feel that you're, I mean, let's be frank, I'll be honest, after bereavement, are you ever in control? You can get in control, but you need to really think through those elements and understand what does that now mean to finances and how do you move forward. It's just interesting, isn't it? You imagine all of that happens in those moments, the things that fly, it's always what's that, what's going to happen here, what about that, what, it's all the what's, it's the
Yeah.
whys and the what's. Why has this happened? What do I need to do? What we naturally never do in that fight flight emotional state is we never step back. It's very hard in those situations emotionally to stop, reflect, think about the how and the what, right? We're all up in that hiatus state, and for all the absolute understandable reasons. So I think it's about, for me, it's really important that we're able to then think, okay, let's just step back. But we need to recognize that's really difficult when these situations arise. And again, what support mechanisms do you have around you? I mean, often, I mean, there's again, fight and flight, I use it in coaching actually, is we naturally as human beings, we're always in fear of doing the wrong thing, right? We freeze instead of act. And where's that coming from? It's just behavior. It's just naturally what we do. Because, and particularly more so when it's in a situation of something that's so unknown to us and unfamiliar. Finances, when this happens, what do you do? Where do you start? And because of that unfamiliarity, there's a danger there that there's high stakes at play, and it's therefore really important to seek out help, guidance, and reassurance, that you can and you will navigate through this.
We're big on the theme in at Funkled that money's more about emotions than it is about maths. And it's interesting that there's research that shows that people see money that they've earned differently to money that they've been given, so that maybe they've inherited. And you talked about the idea of life insurance that can pay out when someone's dead, or that there is inheritance coming to somebody. And so not only have you got the psychology of way people are looking at that money differently to the money they've earned. I've got to look after that money, but I can actually spend that money. You've then got the heightened emotions of the fact that someone's passed away. And so you've got the natural psychology around how people interact with money, then really heightened by the impact of a loved one passing away as well. It becomes a really important moment for people to be able to act in a really clear and rational manner at a time when it's really difficult to do that. What therefore do you see as the immediate practical issues that people have got to deal with, but they've got to deal with inside that emotional maelstrom? I'm thinking about, the bills are carrying on for somebody. Even simple things like mobile phone contracts are still going. But then you've got the big things like pensions and insurance policies.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a great believer in these situations. We don't know what happens in those situations. I'll give my personal example. I mean, I've
Mm-hmm.
worked in financial services for 38 years. Okay, you could argue I know what I would do, but I know that I would point immediately to my financial advisor as an example to say, how do I navigate this? What would I do? That would be what I would do. But I do recognize that a lot of people do not use an advisor, and that's why for me, I would be saying in those situations, look at having, if you've got insurance, the first thing is to step back and really think about, first and foremost, don't panic, because if and it depends who's passed away.
Mm-hmm.
Dan, I think that's really important, isn't it? Because if it's a partner, right, you're going to be even more transactional, because you want to cancel a mobile bill. And also, bizarrely, what about an Apple account? Right, let's take it to that other level where there's all of those precious memories and photos, and how do you even get access to those sort of things, right? I mean, this is pretty big. And I think it's about stepping back and looking logically about what's the bills out. It has to be logic. What are the bills out? What needs to just be cancelled? Because that, to your example there, that's to me just transactional. It's then if you think about it as a pyramid, there's the base fundamentals of the bills, etc. But then as you get up, what are the finances that were in situ? What savings are there? What pension, as you say, etc. And it's then how you navigate that. Now, to someone that doesn't have that support, I would strongly advise that you have someone that's there to support you in that regard, right? Where have you had an interaction with an advisor at any point in your life? Whether you're a mortgage advisor, your bank, you need to have that framework. So my view would be, in that situation, is to reach out and get guidance. Now, if I look at what we've developed with Zurich as a great example, if you had a Zurich policy, okay, let's be honest. If you had a Zurich policy in that situation that you've explained, we've partnered with Empathy, and we've worked, and this is something we're doing globally as Zurich, but we've partnered with them because they do just what you're saying, Dan. Okay, they would have immediate access to basically a dedicated care manager. And what that care manager would do is all of these things we've talked about. Okay, right, where'd you start? Let's just declutter all of this situation. What needs to happen? Let's look at, it's not just about admin. And to be fair, the stuff you pointed there is bereavement admin, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
bereavement admin, closing accounts, all of that, you know, whilst you think it's just a transactional, let's just do it, don't underestimate how difficult that will be. So the partnership with empathy takes a lot of that burden away. You know, the closing of accounts, the fraud protection, all the legal side of things. And what do you need to do to navigate that? So a care handler reduces, I mean, we've used this description of it reduces the paralysis, you know, where you find yourself. And ultimately, that support gives you a personalized care plan and practical tools. But at the same time, this is not just online, it's a
Yeah.
person at the other side of the screen. And we recognize that with all of these things, you need a human in the loop. I mean, my version would be an advisor. And equally, my advisor is likely to point me because I'm a Zurich customer to empathy. We've had a great response from advisors about this service. And equally, we're offering this to our advisors because that will allow you, as you've described, to navigate this position.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There,
allows you
there's
to navigate it.
there's the emotional side where people can feel overwhelmed or lost or just snowed under by everything that they've got to deal with. But then there's also the from a very practical side of it, an awful lot of time and money that can end up being lost as a consequence of feeling those emotions, isn't there? Um, yeah, I think from a research perspective, I think you guys have sort of delved into the amount of time and money that people end up losing because of the admin burden of dealing with a death. What's that way up in your mind between the emotional weight, but then the actual quantifiable time and money?
I think the thing is with this, with customers, is the challenge you've got is in that situation. Where'd you start? I would say, and how do they proportion time? And I'm sure your
Hmm.
situation, Dan, you probably spent more time grieving than in that practical side of how do I get organized and get
Yeah,
sorted. And in all of that time, the clock is ticking. And let's be brutally honest, most people, you only move forward post a funeral.
yeah,
Really, you're still in, I mean, we've all been there where that is then that point of moving forward from that. And to your point, the clock's ticking, what bills are going out that shouldn't be, etc., etc. And I think for us, it's about creating a plan and recognizing that leaning into a form of how do I now take control? How do I now step back? How to look? Now, that sounds very simple, but we need you to move then into that. Let's look down. Where do I start? There's the bills, right?
yeah.
There's what's going out the door. There's the practical side of then the what else was available, online accounts. Where do I start? Online passwords. Where do I start? And again, it's a challenge, I think, for everyone to deal with that. It comes back down to why we've worked with empathy because they give that solution, Dan. You know, most people, if I said to you now, if I looked on my Apple account under passwords now, I'll be brutally honest, I think there's about 80 apps and
Yeah,
80 passwords. And how would my partner know what to do? You know, how would my husband know what to even do in that situation?
yeah.
That's why having services like what we've done with empathy will really help in those situations. So the question is how do we embed those sort of services more deeply into what we do in society so those things are readily available?
And the point here is that this is not a service that's it's not a service that's people, transactional financial service. This is simply there as attached to being a customer ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, if I think about it, you've got the immediate, someone's died, life comes to a stop. As I said, well, life has ended, if we're
Hmm.
honest. And if someone's still working or self-employed or whatever, income stops, bills are still coming in. Families have to deal with all of that financial funeral planning, accounts, policies, right? And then in all of that, as we've said, they're so overwhelmed. So that combination, how do you navigate it? And then, what we also need to think about is while all that's happening, Dan, you imagine the emotion, you touched on emotion early on. What's that emotional weight that's going on in someone's mind about money decisions, right? It's not just about the death side of it, but financially, how am I now going to remember what goes where? How do I now make sure that I don't make any future decisions incorrectly? Because that could have a knock-on consequence to what we do. And I mean, in terms of that lost time, it's paper. I mean, have you ever? I mean, I don't know about you. My grandparents, and I don't, and I'm sure everyone listening to this, my granddad, I mean, bless him now, he lived about 110, he passed away. He had a briefcase. Well, it wasn't a briefcase, it was this old satchel thing on the top of his wardrobe, and you lifted it out, and it had, it even had bond from 1932 on it. It was about 10 shillings and whatever it was, and a bit of this and a bit of that. The reality actually is, even in 2026, I would suggest there's parts of paperwork knocking about that would suggest what's available. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff online now. But, when you come to navigating that, where'd you start?
Yeah.
Where'd you start? The paperwork. And also, what we do find is people probably end up taking time off work because they can't consume that also while they're working as well. So, where'd you start?
And
And I remember sadly when my grandma passed away, it's like, where do you now start? But thankfully, again, with planning,
yeah.
having a will, all of those things, where does money need to pass? Where has what been assigned? If you stepped back today after listening to this and said, if I just wrote on a piece of paper, or where are all my bits and bobs? It's its simplest level, and we don't push that off because we never got time. But because I have worked in financial services, and I know my advisor would, but I have got a list that goes, these are my passwords. It's safe. And again, with empathy, that's our next iteration of what we'll launch later in at the end of this month. Where are all of those things that I just know they'll naturally pass through to my loved ones, so they can pick up those iCloud pictures. They can pick up all those memories. They can get you see where I'm coming from, but we never plan for that, do we?
Yeah. So this is a means of capturing all of that in advance, where the passwords are to things not just financial, but also the practical day-to-day stuff.
Yeah. And particularly, I mean, I'm thinking about me as an example. Who does all the bills?
Mm-hmm.
Who does all, and again, who in a household manages everything? And
Yeah.
again, that in of itself, if you're in a situation where it's not you, how do you educate yourself to really understand the finances of the household?
Yeah.
What's what? And we never sit down and talk about that over dinner, or over, I'm Yorkshire, over tea. We never say, we just don't, do we? And
No.
it's really weird. I mean, when we never talk about, can you imagine on a Friday night, or what if I die? What you guys gonna do? They're gonna go, are you okay? So maybe we need to lean into this bit more as a society to say, to your introductory post, this will happen. How do we make sure we've got some sense of what's what before, when it does hit, we've got a bit of a plan for a plan?
Yep. You mentioned getting help and support then. And you mentioned that you working with your own financial advisor. I'm acutely aware that only 8.7% of adults in the UK benefit from
Yeah.
financial advice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which means that if this when people are struggling with grief and bereavement, there's going to be a vast proportion of people who don't have that support.
Agreed.
There's also another, if that's the advice gap in the UK as it's known, there's also an insurance gap in the UK,
No, indeed.
whereby when the worst happens, some people are going to be covered by life insurance, by income protection, by other such things, but many aren't. How do you quantify and qualify the value of both insurance and advice for people? And in the context of this conversation, but generally as
Yeah,
well.
no, absolutely. I mean, in the context of this conversation, firstly, I mean, I've lived and breathed this stuff. I'm 38 years in, okay, and I have to say, there's so much more as a sector we need to do to reach customers and make sure they've got access to advice. It really pains me, and for that, so I would say I'll start off in terms of how do you move forward in life. Let's say you're gonna, I mean, we've got a high proportion of customers out there that are renting. Right. So, how do you in society interface with what's that touch point where you may first enter into thinking about an ability to have some form of financial advice conversation? Okay.
Okay.
And I've got, don't start me. We should have this far more covered in the school, in the, in schooling, as far as I'm concerned, and get that real base of understanding. As to whether there's an interest at that point is another matter. But if you think about in life, your first normal interaction around this sort of stuff is in a mortgage. So the first time you think about, right, I'm going to take on the biggest debt, which is of my life, and I'm going to take a big loan to get the house of my, get on that property ladder. My view is at that point in today, we should be talking more overtly around, okay, let's understand what is the financial needs you have right now. Okay. And that in of itself, Dan, should allow then. So if you've got a mortgage today and you don't have cover, most certainly you should be reaching out to who gave you that mortgage and having that conversation. Okay. Because that is your first segue, I'd be honest. You've then got those that are renting. How do we start to look at where landlords have an obligation to be saying, have you got your income protected? Because if and if worst happens. So I think we need to step back to your point, because I haven't got a magic wand, Dan, but we need to think in society, what are those touch points that customers have where there's an opportunity to start talking about these things? Because we all know the value of advice, and actually the access to no advice is more challenging. And we know the reasons around that in terms of cost, regulation, etc., etc. But I think as a customer, think about as you step out in life, and who has ever explained to a customer the hierarchy of financial needs? You know it, I know it, because we did financial planning probably, I'm probably a lot older than you, back in the day, which told me you need to make sure that you can, you've got, if the worst happens, you can cover your bills. If you die, you cover your risks, etc. That core base foundation. You then have sufficient savings to draw upon if the worst happens. And then you got the ladder of savings, pensions, and it goes that way. Wouldn't it be great if one day customers could have that blueprint of what that is and got an interest in it and then had an access to? So you're giving me a question there, Dan, that sadly I don't think I could ever answer, because we need to therefore step back and think for customers, what's their first interaction points, and how can we make sure that if the advisor's not saying it, they're asking for it as well. Does that answer your question? It's a bit edgy, but I would love it that there was an advisor on every accessible and we could address this. And I think we will at some point, but I think there's a lack of and it's not customers' fault. Do they really understand and do they know where to go?
Yeah. Do you think that the average person out there understands and values insurance highly enough?
No, I absolutely do. I mean, I see lots of research, and when we say insurance, isn't it's everyone knows if you get a house, you need to have contents and buildings, right? If you get a car, you've got to have car insurance. So I think that is, and actually, you could argue even today you should have travel insurance. If you go away, you must have travel insurance, because that's a little.
But that's the distinction between those mandatory insurances on the day-to-day and then the stuff that people don't necessarily cover. So where do you think the perception gap comes in? Or is it because society has made it mandatory to have car insurance, but it's not mandatory to have life insurance or income insurance?
It's against the law. Yeah, I mean, it's against the law if you don't, right? I mean, there's the mandatory element, and that I think is what has by not having to have life insurance as an example, that has weakened that desire, I would suggest. I mean, when we do look at research and we say, do you know what? I mean, pretty much everyone knows what life insurance is. You pay a premium. If you die, God forbid, it pays an amount of money, okay?
Hmm.
The understand, and it's not a complex product. The challenge you've got is, do people appreciate when they need it and why they might need it? And again, that access to advice. I mean, we need to appreciate, actually, Dan, a lot of people come direct on websites into insurers, okay? Obtaining life insurance, obtaining other non-mandated products. And again, don't underestimate if you're exposed to someone losing a loved one. When we've asked people that haven't used an advisor, 9 times out of 10 it's because they've seen that experience of their friend or family member, and they go, I haven't got this, I need to take action.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but this mandatory element, I could go on till the cows come home in terms of my perspective. Back in the day, remember, it was mandated that if
Yeah.
you had a mortgage, that was taken away. In some European countries, there is a requirement. If you have a mortgage, you have to have life cover.
Yeah.
In the UK, that's no longer mandated. So that's for another conversation, where how can we make sure that when you have a financial need and you have an obligation to think about what if anything was to happen, how do we make sure that everyone better understands the financial risks they face and the consequence of such if the worst were to happen, and then what is the solution with which to access that? And
Yeah.
again, if you're fortunate to be in the workplace and have an employer, what role can the employer equally play in raising financial awareness and resilience, etc.? So there's a multitude of sources, Dan, with which you become aware of this, I would suggest. The first thing is how can we get everyone? It might be I'm going a bit creative now, so forgive me, but it might be that we need like a breast cancer awareness day. We might need an awareness day, that the what if a day. I've started giving you an idea there. What
Hmm.
is that what if a day? I'll take that away, actually. What is that? The what if day.
Yeah.
And what is that? What is that day where you step back? I mean, but the downside is it's something that we don't get attracted to, because it's such an emotive subject, and we're in optimism bias, Dan. We don't want to think about death, because guess what? We're immortal and we'll never die.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the clear things are, if you've got dependents or loved ones and you want it to be easy on your passing, get a will. And if you've got any debts like a mortgage, get some
Yeah,
life cover. Um,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
understand both of those quite in depth. That's
Yeah, and
clear.
family income benefit. I mean, it's interesting. My daughter's still doing RO1, and last night she explained to me family income benefit, mum. And ultimately, that is an element, a type of term, it's life insurance, that basically, if your children, you have a baby, they're going to be probably dependent till what, 21. We probably push that out now to 24 or whatever, and
Hmm.
that ultimately would pay on death of the parent an income that would replace their income. That is an exact example of, if the worst happens, dad or mum or partner's salary
Yeah.
is still there. Now
Yeah.
that is a very simple concept. That is a very simple concept. And again, covering the mortgage, absolutely, because that's the biggest outpayment, the replacement of that salary. So I'm a great believer of, you would have the mortgage covered and you'd also have the income covered through a family income benefit policy.
Okay. Um, Louise, I always end each podcast, each Funkle pod, with the same question to everybody, which is, what do you know now about money that you wish you'd known sooner?
I'd have invested a lot more, a lot younger in my days.
Do you know what?
Um,
It's amazing how so many people, including the experts that we're bringing on from the financial services
yeah,
world, say exactly that same thing.
yeah. I mean, insurance to me, it's back to that hierarchy of needs. If you think about warmth, water, all of those things we need to survive, and then think about from an insurance viewpoint, what do I need to protect? But also, so that's the protection layer. That's always the the layer that's there, but then thinking about how do I invest more earlier in my life to then give me a more, a more resilient future. But let's be frank, in today's world, if someone's watching this that's 25, or someone watching that's even for whatever, we all know we've got the demands of income, outgoings, and how can we just say, I know that extra 10 or 20 pound, but how do you get disciplined to say, and I'm just going to save it and I'm going to forget? And we don't, we just spend it. So
Yeah.
that would be my learning. I would say I would have saved a lot more earlier in my younger years.
Louise, thank you. It's a tricky topic, but it's one worth talking about frankly and openly, rather than hiding away from it. Big takeaways from me. There's only 3 things in life, in my mind, that are certain: death and taxes, and that somebody will use the death and taxes line when discussing this topic. So therefore, there you go. I've done it.
Yeah.
We can't avoid it. You can't plan for how it's going to hit you. Nothing's going to make it feel better apart from time. However, we can get a money system in place so that we can remove the pressure, we can slow decisions down, and give ourselves time and permission to focus on dealing with loss rather than just paperwork. What we've touched on is getting advice and support and help before we encounter grief is ideal. It's not always possible. And money's not going to take away the pain, but life insurance and critical illness policies, when they kick in, they at least remove one major stress and worry to allow you to then focus on the grieving. And having everything sorted from an admin perspective is going to save a great deal of time and hassle at a time when you probably just don't have the emotional energy for it unless you've got it sorted. So if there's listeners out there, if you know somebody who's dealing with grief, a friend, a colleague, a family member, or someone who you know might need the support one day soon, please share this episode with them. Because being prepared, it's not about predicting grief or stopping it, but it can help protect people when it does arrive. Please remember, we're a financial education platform. We don't give financial advice or make personal recommendations, but there are plenty of tools and learning modules on all of these topics on the site. And of course, there's the services available from Zurich that cover support in this area as well. So if you need to, get funkled, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.